The glass chandelier over the 5th anniversary gala swayed, casting fractured light over the champagne tower. I wore a sharply tailored black evening gown and stood in the center of the hall, holding a half-full glass of chilled white wine. Beside me, Ethan was whispering with two principal investors. He wore a bespoke suit and a perfectly timed confident smile, occasionally resting his hand lightly on my waist as he introduced me to passing guests as the company's co-founder and CFO. To everyone, we were the most enviable golden couple in fintech, co-founders who had built the company to the top of the industry in 5 years while maintaining an impeccable marriage. Ethan signaled for a waiter to change my glass, his gaze lingering at the edge of the room for half a second. I followed his line of sight and saw the new executive assistant to the CEO, Clara, standing by the lounge. She wore a slightly daringly cut red dress and held a freshly printed dinner agenda. When Ethan's eyes swept over her, Clara did not avert her gaze like an ordinary employee. She tilted her chin subtly, her look openly possessive and provocative. And even as she lifted her glass to sip, her eyes stayed glued to Ethan. Ethan's fingers tightened on my waist for a fraction, then loosened as if nothing had happened, and he turned back to laugh and converse with the investors. Midway through the dinner, I excused myself to the powder room and detoured into the finance monitoring room. As the person in charge of the company's cash flow, I had a habit of spot-checking real-time data during large events. I deftly entered the highest-level password and pulled up the month's executive expense reimbursements and overseas fund transfer logs. The data streamed rapidly across the screen. One transaction from a week ago caught my attention, a $3 million remittance from our Singapore offshore account. It was labeled Preliminary Overseas Market Expansion Consultancy Fee, signed by Ethan himself, and the recipient was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I opened the transaction's underlying chain and found that the authorized signatory account for that shell company logged in from the encrypted terminal the admin department had just set up exclusively for Clara. I closed my laptop and stepped out of the monitoring room. From the hallway around the corner came soft footsteps. Clara was standing there holding Ethan's private coat, a teasing smile at her lips. "Madam," Ethan said. He felt a little dizzy. "I'll take his coat to him," Clara said lightly, her eyes flashing an impatient arrogance. "Just put it back in the lounge," I said calmly as I walked past her without pausing. "The company's financial audit starts next week. Remind your department to have the recent overseas reimbursement documents ready." Clara's smile froze for a moment. Then she snorted softly. I returned to the banquet hall and watched Ethan clinking glasses with others as a coldness spread through me bit by bit. The uproar of the 5th anniversary celebration finally settled into silence at midnight. Back home, Ethan loosened his tie and casually draped his suit jacket over the arm of the sofa, his voice carrying the tiredness of someone who'd been socializing. The investors were pleased with tonight's dinner, especially the overseas expansion plan. They think the timing is perfect. "I need to go to Singapore next month for an on-site inspection. If you're free, you can come along." I sat at the dressing table and, using the mirror's reflection to watch him, replied calmly and evenly. That $3 million preliminary consulting fee in the company account was already transferred to the offshore account in Singapore last week, wasn't it? Does overseas expansion require such a large consultant fee with unclear flow? How come I, as the CFO, didn't see a detailed project evaluation report at the board meeting? Ethan's movement visibly froze. His tie still hung loose at his shirt collar. He turned, a flicker of fleeting panic crossing his face before he quickly restored his composed, controlling smile. He came up behind me, placed his hands on my shoulders, and met my gaze through the mirror. "You're doubting me?" That was board-approved strategic funding, entrusted to me with full authority. We routed it through a special channel to avoid tipping off competitors. "You're my wife and the CFO. How can you lack this much trust?" "Trust is built on transparent data, Ethan." I gently pushed his hands away, stood, and turned to face him. "Every company fund transfer must comply with audit and regulation. Since this is strategic funding, I'll have the audit team formally pull the compliance records for this project tomorrow." Ethan's expression darkened slightly. The temperature in the air seemed to drop a few degrees. He didn't say more, merely snorted, picked up his robe, and went into the bathroom. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the spacious office. I had barely sat down at my desk when the internal phone began ringing urgently. It was the head of administration. Her tone a little strained. "Director Shen, Clara just submitted an office personnel adjustment request asking to move her personal desk directly outside the president's suite to better handle Mr. Ethan's daily schedule at any time. What do you think about this? Since when do administrative staff get to be moved into the outer area of the president's suite as an exception?" I cut her off coldly. "Reject it. The company's administrative rules are clear. Transfers that don't meet regulations will not be approved." Less than 10 minutes after I hung up, the office door was pushed open a crack. Clara didn't even knock. She strode in on her high heels holding the rejected electronic approval form, wearing the arrogance of someone who thinks they've won. She came to my desk, planted her hands on the surface, and leaned in slightly. "Director Shen, Ethan has verbally agreed to my desk move, saying it will let me coordinate his work more efficiently. You're blocking it. Are you just insecure about the rapport between him and me?" Clara's tone was provocative, her eyes full of contempt and testing. I lifted my eyes to look at her calmly, my voice flat. "This company is not your private domain. We follow rules here. If you think Ethan's verbal consent outweighs company regulations, you can ask him to convene the board to amend the bylaws. Until then, your desk stays in the administrative hall, nowhere else." Clara hit a soft spot. Her face flushed in and out as she bit her lip and sneered coldly. "Director Shen, hold on too tight and things end up breaking. I hope you can keep being this stubborn." After speaking, she turned on her heel and left arrogantly, slamming the office door shut. Less than 2 minutes after Clara left, my personal phone suddenly lit up. It was an MMS from an unknown number. I opened it and saw a photo taken in the CEO office lounge. In the photo, Ethan was looking down as he adjusted Clara's necklace. They were standing very close, the ambiguous atmosphere nearly spilling out of the screen. A text followed. "Mr. Shen, some positions that don't belong to you should be vacated." Look, I even picked his tie myself. Staring at the picture on the screen, I felt no anger. Instead, my mind cleared. They thought such a crude provocation could break my psychological defenses. Not knowing this was precisely the irrefutable evidence I had been waiting for. I immediately pulled up the system's permission logs. The original file for that photo sent from the unknown number had been uploaded to the company's internal LAN public cloud drive just 2 minutes earlier, and the terminal IP address that uploaded it pointed to Clara's office computer. At the same time, I activated a deep tracking script I had long since planted in the company's core financial system. Through back-end data tracing, I was surprised to find that the $3 million overseas offshore funds had not only gone into a shell company in the Cayman Islands but, in the past 48 hours, had been transferred in batches into 3 overseas personal accounts held under the names of Clara's relatives. The operation key for those transfers had been used with Ethan's highest administrator privileges. They had not only betrayed this marriage emotionally but had crossed the legal line in business. This was blatant embezzlement and the transfer of the company's core assets. I encrypted and backed up all the newly obtained transaction proofs, IP login logs, and the 2 of their chat records, and imported them onto an external encrypted hard drive. Then I called a partner at the top-tier commercial law firm I've worked with for years. "Lawyer Chen, I need you to draft a special equity pledge and asset preservation agreement. Also, start preparing the emergency convening procedures for the board of directors now." My voice was unusually calm. Every word carried an unquestionable authority. Countdown to the Overseas Roadshow. Day 4. The whole company thrummed with a taut, frantic energy. As CFO, my desk was piled high with financial forecast models and pitch deck slides rushed in overnight by every department. Yet at that moment the core tech team handed me an unusual system access log. The log showed that at 3 a.m. today someone had attempted to use high-level admin privileges to bulk download the company's most critical patent database. And the destination pointed straight to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I didn't alarm IT directly. Instead, I took the freshly printed log and walked straight to the CEO's office. When I pushed the door open, the room was filled with the scent of expensive men's cologne. Ethan sat behind his desk flipping through papers while Clara stood at his side holding a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Seeing me enter, Clara didn't hurry to hide anything as she usually might. She casually set the coffee by Ethan's hand, her fingers brushing his shoulder, her eyes openly provocative and smug. Mr. Shen, in such a hurry to see Ethan, is there an urgent financial issue that needs approval? Clara spoke first, her tone laced with condescension. I didn't give her a glance and walked straight to Ethan's desk, slapping the system access log down with a sharp sound. Ethan, our core patent database was illegally bulk packaged at 3 this morning, and the data was sent to that Cayman Islands shell company. As CEO, shouldn't you give me, and the board, a reasonable explanation? Ethan's expression flickered. The calm on his face was instantly pierced by a flash of panic. He instinctively looked to Clara, whose smug look froze and was replaced by a guilty, terrified look. Ethan quickly composed himself, cleared his throat, and pushed the log back. What are you imagining? What Cayman Islands shell company? That was an authorized, compliant cloud backup operation for expanding into overseas high-end markets, entrusted to our overseas tech team. You're the finance director, how can you be suspicious of normal business arrangements? Normal arrangement? I sneered, leaning in, my gaze slicing across Ethan's face like a blade. Using the highest admin privileges at 3 in the morning to bypass the board and privately transmit core patent code to an offshore shell that was registered less than a month ago. Is that compliance? Ethan, you're not only suspected of embezzlement financially, you're now illegally transferring the company's core assets. You're cutting the company off at the roots. Faced with my firm stance and irrefutable evidence, Clara couldn't keep up the act. She tore off the mask and stepped forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Shen, can't you see the situation yet? Times have changed. Ethan is the soul of this company. Technology and capital only realize value in the right hands. Instead of sulking here like a jealous wife, sign off on the asset restructure. After the overseas entity lists, you'll benefit too. Why ruin everything? Looking at these two, already drunk on greed and desire, I couldn't help but find them utterly laughable. They thought they had orchestrated a flawless capital transfer, not realizing that from the moment they stepped into this trap, every step they took had been tracked by my precise surveillance and planned contingencies. Those who make things final are never me. I straightened up, adjusted my suit jacket, and looked down at them. Ethan, the overseas roadshow is in 3 days. I want to see how long you, as CEO, can hold up on stage when regulatory bodies at home and abroad and every board member receive evidence that these core patents were transferred illegally. With that, I gave them no chance to argue, turned, opened the office door, and walked out without looking back. From behind me came Clara's panicked questions and Ethan's angry, shameful roar. I sat back in my office, opened the encrypted hard drive, and looked at the fully compiled financial records, the ownership-piercing proof for the offshore accounts, and the backup recording of the conversation from a moment ago. The blinds in the office filtered out some of the glaring sunlight, slicing the floor into intersecting geometric patches of light and shadow. I sat at my desk. On the computer screen hung quietly the final version of the agreement Chen sent overnight, a document titled Supplementary Agreement on Special Authorization for Overseas Strategic Expansion and Equity Pledge Against Risk. On the surface, the agreement seemed to smooth the way for the upcoming overseas roadshow and the establishment of overseas entities, granting the CEO greater decision-making authority in specific overseas commercial entities. But its core clauses were crafted into a tight series of locks. If any non-compliant audit alert arose regarding the overseas entity's cash flow or asset transfers, or if it failed to pass statutory compliance review within the prescribed period, that entity and certain core voting rights of the domestic parent company would automatically tilt toward a special trust fund held by the chief financial officer until debts were settled and assets replenished. There was a light knock at the door. Then it opened and Ethan walked in with a sullen expression. Clara did not follow him. The office held only the two of us. Clearly, after yesterday's heated confrontation, he had realized things were spiraling out of control and had to lower his pride to probe my bottom line. Ethan walked to my desk, braced his hands on the surface, and deliberately slowed his tone toward compromise. About yesterday, we all want what's best for the company. And maybe our words were a bit extreme. The Overseas Roadshow is coming up. It's the company's core strategy this year. If discord within the board leaks out now, it would be a fatal blow to the stock price and investor confidence. What exactly do you want? As long as it's not excessive, we can talk. I looked up and met his eyes, seemingly sincere but in fact calculating, and a faint, amused curve appeared at the corner of my mouth. Talk? Ethan, are you not a little late to be bargaining? The unexplained loss of $3 million from the company account and the logs showing core patents packaged up late at night, those aren't things you can smooth over by saying for overseas expansion. So what do you want? Really blow this up? How would that benefit you? If the company's market value shrinks, the equity you hold as CFO will lose a lot of value too. Ethan's voice rose slightly, barely concealing his agitation. I methodically pushed the printed supplementary agreement on special authorization and equity pledge across the desk to him and tapped the signature line with my finger. I don't want to burn everything down. After all, half my effort is in this company too. It's simple to calm this storm. Sign this supplementary agreement. If you're going to take full responsibility for overseas market expansion, you must also bear the corresponding legal and financial backstop. If you can recover the $3 million intact and record it compliantly within 3 days, and sign this risk pledge agreement for the overseas entity, I'll pretend yesterday's technical alert never happened and fully cooperate with you for the roadshow. Ethan lowered his head and stared at the cover of the agreement. His brow twisted into a tight knot. He flipped through the clauses quickly. Although the document's early language did indeed appear to grant him absolute authority over overseas expansion, his shrewdness made him scent the embedded risks. Yet he had no way out now. The funds in that Cayman Islands shell company were already being gradually diverted by Clara's family for their own use. And if the board conducted a full audit on the eve of the roadshow, he would not only lose the CEO position but could face criminal charges. By contrast, the so-called risk pledge agreement in front of him was, to his eyes, nothing more than a piece of paper where form outweighed substance. As long as he could smoothly carry out the upcoming capital operations, those clauses would have no chance to take effect. Fine. You asked for this, Ethan said through his teeth, grabbed the signing pen on the desk, and with almost no hesitation, briskly signed his name in several crucial signature fields on the agreement. He slammed the agreement shut and looked at me with a cold sneer. Remember what was said today. At the roadshow in 3 days, I don't want to see any kind of stumbling block. Seeing the bright red signature and thumbprint on the agreement, I sneered inwardly. He thought he had signed a pass to an overseas capital feast, never imagining that he had just placed the first substantive legal shackle on himself. After Ethan left, I immediately picked up the internal line, scanned and archived the freshly signed legal original, and sent it through an encrypted channel directly to the company's 2 most senior founding shareholders and the external supervisory committee that had long been responsible for the company's compliance oversight. At the same time, I contacted an overseas commercial trust institution and formally activated the custody procedures for the trust fund. Ethan and Clara were still indulging in the double-pronged dream of getting rich. They had even begun arranging a celebration party to register a new company overseas after the roadshow. Little did they know that the net woven from law, compliance, capital, and irrefutable evidence had quietly tightened its final cord. All the chains of evidence, the reports tracing the flow of funds, and this legally binding pledge agreement had already formed a perfect closed loop. I turned, looked out at the city neon lights gradually coming on beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Night was as dark as ink, but the distant lights were unusually clear. Tomorrow would be the decisive node determining the outcome of this game. I drew a deep breath and filed the documents on the desk one by one. The clock hands slid silently past 11:30 at night. The entire office tower had long since fallen into a deathly stillness, with only a solitary floor lamp burning in the CEO's top-floor office. I sat in my own office, the screen before me flashing the final confirmation receipt from an overseas trust institution, the special authorization and share pledge supplemental agreement personally signed by Ethan had been legally notarized and filed. With that, no matter what tricks Ethan tried in his upcoming overseas roadshow, he had legally and commercially cut off every escape route. At that moment my personal phone screen suddenly lit up. A notification popped up showing a multimedia message from an unknown encrypted channel. I opened the image. The glaring light was especially sharp in the dark. It was a few intimate photos taken in the CEO's lounge, and the protagonists were Ethan and Clara. In the pictures, Clara's clothes were disheveled, and she was curled up against Ethan in an extremely suggestive pose, while Ethan leaned down to respond to her. The smiles on both their faces were full of smugness and provocation, as if announcing to the world their absolute control over this business empire and this marriage. Immediately after, an extremely provocative text followed. Mr. Shen, when you see these photos, I wonder if your mood is as cold as this late night? Ethan never truly belonged to you, and the company's future, like this man, will ultimately belong to us. If you're sensible and hand in your resignation now, you can leave with dignity. Otherwise, once tomorrow's overseas roadshow ends, these photos will be plastered in every corner of the company and you will be utterly ruined. Looking at those images and the humiliating message on the screen, not a ripple crossed my face. They thought that by using this most primitive, most piercing attack on a woman's pride, they could completely shatter my psychological defenses and drive me to collapse and despair. They overestimated their psychological tactics and underestimated the coldness of a financial operator who had weathered countless business storms. I didn't reply. Instead, I methodically captured holographic screenshots of the photos and the sender's terminal IP for evidence. Through back-end code tracking, I clearly saw that the message had originated from the private tablet Clara kept on her desk. I gathered those photos together with yesterday's system access logs, the proof of offshore account penetration, records of embezzlement transactions, and the share pledge agreement stamped with Ethan's signature into a single folder. Then I opened the company-wide mass mail management system. Within that system there was a highest emergency notice privilege authorized directly by the board and rarely used. Once activated, this privilege bypassed all routine approval layers and sent an irrevocable, highest priority message with one click to every domestic and overseas employee, every core shareholder, and all related regulatory agencies. I uploaded the top secret file, containing all the conclusive evidence, the truth about asset transfers, and the notice of equity changes, as an attachment to the mass mail system. I succinctly set the email subject: urgent notice on company asset security, serious violations by senior management, and shareholding changes. In the body of the email, I used extremely restrained yet weighty legal language to detail all the facts of Ethan's use of his position to transfer core patents and embezzle company assets, and attached the evidentiary chain of Clara's involvement as an accomplice, as well as the statement of changes to equity and voting rights that have formally taken effect under the latest supplemental agreement. I stared at the announcement page on the screen, fully edited and quietly awaiting sending, and took a deep breath. My finger hovered over the left mouse button as I set the timed send for 8 a.m. sharp, the moment when employees are gradually arriving at the office and preparing for the new day's work. After finishing all this, I shut down the computer completely and unplugged all peripheral power. Then I picked up the car keys and bag from the desk and stood up. Walking to the desk, I gently took off the wedding ring and placed it in the center of the table. Without the slightest hesitation, I turned off my personal phone and pressed the power button until it shut down. At 7:50 in the morning, the first rays of dawn had just pierced the horizon, gilding the entire office tower with a sharp rim of gold. The glass doors at the reception slid open on schedule, and several administrative staff carrying freshly bought hot coffees chatted and laughed as they walked in. The electronic screen in the lobby looped the morning financial news. The air carried the busy calm of a new week beginning. No one knew that on this seemingly ordinary morning, a corporate storm capable of completely overturning the company's senior leadership hung quietly over everyone's heads, with the countdown down to the last 10 seconds. Exactly 8 o'clock. The company's central mail server emitted an almost inaudible boom. From board members and department heads at home and abroad down to ordinary admin, technical, and reception staff, nearly everyone's computer screen displayed, at the same second, a system mail notification with a red urgent marker in the lower right corner. The first to open the message was a senior engineer in the R&D department. He had expected an ordinary weekly schedule, but when his eyes swept over the subject line, emergency notice on company asset security, serious senior management violations, and equity changes, his hand suddenly trembled. He opened the attachment. Dense screenshots of financial flows, registration records of a Cayman Islands offshore shell company, system-level logs showing mass illegal downloads of core patents, and those few audacious, damning private photos taken in the CEO's office instantly filled his entire screen. "Oh my God, what is this?" the engineer cried out. His voice sounded especially harsh in the quiet, open-plan office. Immediately, colleagues around him were alerted and each clicked open the notice. For a moment the whole office filled with gasps and the frantic clicks of mice. Ethan and Clara, they actually packaged and transferred the company's core patents privately? And that $3 million accounting gap. Look at the equity change statement at the back. According to the newly effective special pledge agreement, the company's actual voting rights and control have all been shifted to a trust fund under Mr. Shin's name. My God. Mr. Shin just pulled out the nuclear option. No wonder the atmosphere has been so strange the past few days. He was setting up a big move. Discussion swept through the floor like a tide. Every employee stared at the ironclad data and photos on their screens, dumbfounded. The cronies in the admin department who had swaggered around because Clara was the CEO's favorite went pale. The coffee cup in one of their hands nearly slipped and shattered on the floor. After a brief silence, the entire building erupted into unprecedented commotion and shock. At the same time, several veteran founding shareholders and the heads of the External Oversight Committee turned ashen the moment they received the email. They immediately called the Internal Compliance Department and urgently convened a full senior management meeting. At the very center of this storm, I sat by the window in a quiet street-facing cafe with my phone completely turned off. Wearing a sharply tailored white suit, I held a warm Americano and calmly watched the ceaseless flow of traffic outside. My world was utterly peaceful, free from external noise or interference. But I knew that inside the office tower the bomb I had personally lit had detonated completely, and no one could put it out now. At the CEO's private elevator entrance in the building, several company inspectors and board representatives who had rushed over stood with stern faces, waiting coldly for me to appear. It was 8:20 in the morning, 10 minutes until the company's senior management meeting, and the indicator light for the CEO's private elevator lit up on the top floor with a crisp ding. Ethan was clearly in a very good mood today. He wore a meticulously tailored bespoke suit, held a freshly drafted overseas roadshow itinerary, and had a confident, assured smile at the corner of his mouth. Behind him, Clara had changed into a limited edition Chanel professional suit, walked in stiletto heels, and wore a smug, triumphant expression. They had just finished breakfast at the upscale restaurant downstairs and were already plotting how to announce a new round of personnel changes at this morning's meeting to completely consolidate administrative power in the company. However, the instant they stepped out of the elevator into the top-floor office area, the atmosphere, normally respectful and bustling, vanished without a trace and was replaced by an eerie, deathly silence. Dozens of employees lined the corridor, gathered by their workstations, and countless eyes fixed on them. Those gazes lacked the usual awe and ingratiation. Instead they held shock, contempt, ridicule, and a detached curiosity as if watching a spectacle. Several young employees even turned their heads and snickered softly. Clara's brow knit slightly. She instinctively put on her assistant's authority and snapped coldly. "What is this, gathering here whispering during work hours? Are your hands no longer for work? Believe me, I'll mark your performance right away. But the administrative manager, who normally obeyed her every order, only gave her a cool look and, rather than shrinking back, turned away without deigning to answer. You people. Clara's face went pale and flushed in turn. She was about to explode when Ethan raised a hand to stop her. Ethan sensed instantly that something was wrong. He followed the crowd's gaze and saw the conference room door ahead standing open. The company's 2 veteran founding shareholders, an outside legal counsel, and the 3 heads of the supervisory committee sat around the long table with sullen faces. At the conference room's entrance, several uniformed company security guards stood solemnly on either side. Board members, already starting the meeting so early? Ethan forced down his unease, plastered on a practiced smile, and stepped toward the conference room. Perfect timing. I was just going to present the latest core strategy for the overseas roadshow. No need to report, Ethan. One of the major shareholders suddenly slammed a thick stack of printed documents onto the conference table, producing a dull crash, his voice crackling with barely contained fury. Open your eyes and look, what is this? Ethan's steps faltered. The smile finally fell from his face. He hurried into the room and picked up the documents. With a single scan, his complexion drained from flushed to ashen, a thin film of cold sweat forming on his brow. The first page of the file was the transaction log showing that he had secretly packaged core patents late at night and transferred $3 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. And tucked among the pages were those obscene intimate photos of him and Clara taken in the office lounge. This is forged. This is malicious slander. Ethan's voice shot up. His body trembled violently as he whirled to Clara behind him. Was it you? Did you put these things here? Clara leaned forward, saw the contents, and was scared out of her wits. Her face went deathly white. She almost dropped the folder in her hands. No. Not me, Ethan. I didn't send these. How could this be possible? How could it not be possible? Came a cold voice from the conference room doorway. The company's compliance chief stood up and slammed a stamped legal document onto the table. At 8 o'clock this morning, the entire company received this notice from the Supreme Emergency System. Moreover, pursuant to the Supplemental Agreement on Special Authorization and Pledge of Equity, previously signed by President Shin and filed with the relevant departments, because you are suspected of serious embezzlement of duties and improper transfer of core assets, the company automatically activated the emergency clause this morning. At present, all of your senior management privileges have been lawfully and forcibly revoked by the system. No. Impossible. I'm the CEO. You have no right to strip me of my privileges. Ethan panicked completely, lunging at the desk like a madman, grabbing the office phone and his tablet and trying to log into the Supreme admin system to lock it down. I will freeze the system. I'll call a board meeting to remove you. His fingers trembled wildly over the screen as he typed the password, but the dialog box that popped up coldly displayed a line in red. Permissions have expired. Your account has been permanently locked by the system. Don't bother. The compliance chief looked at him coldly and waved a hand. As of this second, you are no longer the company's CEO. Furthermore, the relevant economic investigation and commercial crime reports have been formally submitted. What awaits you is the harshest enforcement of the law. A few security guards stepped forward expressionlessly, one on each side, seizing the completely collapsed Ethan. Nearby, Clara sat down in terror, letting out a desperate scream. The entire top-floor office fell silent in that moment. Everyone watched coldly as the curtain fell on this farce. The air in the conference room seemed to solidify into something tangible, pressing down so hard it was hard to breathe. The security guard's grip on Ethan's arm showed not the slightest slack, the cold glint off the metal handcuffs stinging everyone's eyes. Ethan had completely lost the elegance and composure he once had as an executive. His shirt collar was askew, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, like a beast driven to the brink, desperately thrashing and roaring. This is unlawful detention. I'm a founder. Without me, the company wouldn't have survived to today. I want to see a lawyer. I'm suing you. Clara, who had slumped to the floor, was already pale as death. Her heavy makeup had been streaked and ruined by tears. She clutched the leg of the desk with white-knuckled fingers, her voice sharp and trembling. "This has nothing to do with me. He forced me. Ethan said if I helped him transfer overseas assets, he'd make me vice president. I was just an assistant following orders. What right do you have to arrest me?" "Shut up." Ethan whipped his head around, his eyes bloodshot as he glared at Clara, teeth bared as he snarled. "Bitch. Even now you want to dump all the filth on me? Who's been egging me in the office every day to transfer the core patents to your family's shell company? Who used a personal account to send those provocative photos? If we go down, we all go down, no one gets away." Watching these two who had once ruled the company together and conspired against me now tearing into each other for their own interests, splitting at the seams in front of everyone, the veteran shareholders in the room turned their faces away coldly. Even looking at them made their eyes feel dirty. Just then, the heavy double doors of the conference room were flung open. I walked in a sharply tailored white suit, my pace steady and unhurried. My gaze was placid, like a bottomless cold pool. The noisy room fell silent in an instant. All eyes turned to me. In the elders and the head of compliance there was not only awe but a relieved sense of having survived some disaster. I went to the head of the long table, pulled out a chair with poise, sat down, folded my hands over the documents, and cast a cold glance at the two collapsed figures on the floor. Had enough? If so, let's talk business. Seeing me, Ethan seized on it as if it were his last straw. He struggled to lunge forward but was held down by the security guards. Tearfully he begged, "Honey, for the sake of our marriage, for the bond of us building this from nothing together, please give me this one chance. I'll return the money right away. I'll give back the patents immediately. Please withdraw the complaint, or I'm finished for good." Hearing the word honey, I couldn't help but let out a faint sneer. I lifted my eyes to the man who once vowed to spend his life with me, my tone devoid of warmth. "Ethan, when you were holding Clara late at night plotting how to move the company's assets and sending those photos to humiliate me, did you ever think of our marriage? When you signed the agreement that pushed yourself into the abyss, did you ever think it would come to this?" I ignored the sobbing, collapsing Ethan and turned to Chen Lu at my side. Chen read out the latest legal liquidation and asset recovery decisions. Chen pushed up his glasses, slowly unfolded a stamped legal document, and his steady, clear voice echoed through the meeting room. In light of former CEO Ethan's serious violations of company bylaws, suspected embezzlement, illegal transfer of core assets, and industrial espionage, and pursuant to the company's newly effective special pledge agreement and the board's unanimous vote, the following decisions are hereby announced. First, Ethan is to be lawfully relieved of all company positions and permanently expelled from the management team. Second, all equity, options, and dividend proceeds held by Ethan and Clara that relate to the company are to be frozen. Third, comprehensive civil litigation and criminal reporting will be initiated to recover all funds and patent assets illegally transferred to the Cayman Islands, the amounts involved being substantial and to be handed over to judicial authorities for processing. After Chin read each item, two economic crime detectives who had been waiting outside the door produced their IDs and entered expressionlessly. They walked directly to Ethan and Clara, read the arrest warrants, and cold handcuffs snapped precisely onto their wrists. Clara let out a despairing scream, collapsed to the floor, and was mercilessly hauled out by the two officers. Ethan's face went ashen. His legs gave out completely and he was dragged from the conference room like a lump of sludge. The main doors slowly closed behind them, completely cutting those once arrogant betrayers off from the company's power core. The meeting room returned to calm. The major shareholder looked at me, took a deep breath, rose and bowed slightly. "President Shen, thanks to your prior arrangements, the company's years of hard work were nearly saved from ruin. From today on, the board fully authorizes you to assume the roles of chairman and CEO and take overall charge." I stood, scanned everyone present, and said in a calm but indisputably firm tone, "The company's crisis is only temporary. From today forward, All non-compliant operations are wiped clean and the tech team will comprehensively upgrade our encryption defenses. We must show the market and our investors that this company will always belong only to those who truly create value. As Ethan and Clara were escorted away by the economic crime officers, the corporate earthquake did not calm inside the office. Instead, it spread like wildfire through the entire financial world and capital markets. Major financial media and social platforms exploded almost simultaneously within half an hour. Headlines like CEO of a well-known fintech company detained on suspicion of embezzlement and former executive assistant suspected of corporate espionage and asset transfer instantly topped every trending list. Clara's family had long run a medium-sized supply chain company in the Circle, and had been bullying their way through the industry on the strength of some capital backing. However, when news of Clara's arrest reached the family's core members, the whole clan instantly fell into chaos. Clara's father, staring at a blurred screenshot of his handcuffed daughter on the news, nearly had a heart attack from rage. They could never have imagined that their daughter, in her climb for status and by attaching herself to Ethan, would be audacious enough to assist him in transferring core overseas patents and illicit funds, dragging the entire family into an abyss. Worse, as the tax authorities and economic crime units launched a penetrating investigation into the shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, multiple overseas-related accounts held by Clara's family were immediately frozen by financial law enforcement. It turned out that to smooth Clara's path, her family had not only deployed some illicit funds but were also implicated in several acts of transnational money laundering and commercial bribery. In no time, foreign law enforcement and domestic economic crime units struck in tandem, conducting carpet-style raids and asset freezes on Clara family businesses. In the interrogation room at the detention center, Clara, who had once been haughty and impeccably made up in public, was now barefaced, wearing a lifeless prison uniform and visibly thinner. Looking at her father and the family lawyer across from her, both equally sullen, her composure collapsed. Tears burst forth like a dam breaking. "Dad, you have to save me. I did this for the company's development. It was Ethan who told me that if we transferred the patents over, we could completely control the company. I was just used by him." Clara's father slammed his palm heavily on the table, trembling with rage, his voice full of disappointed fury. "You ungrateful daughter. Still shirking responsibility now. The economic crime unit has nailed Ethan completely. Do you think dumping all the dirt on him will let you escape? Our overseas accounts are all frozen. The family business faces bankruptcy and liquidation, all because you, this fool, let wolves in." Hearing that her father would not save her but instead angrily berate her, Clara's last psychological defense utterly collapsed. She screamed in protest and began to furiously curse Ethan. In the interrogation room beside hers, Ethan was likewise facing harsh questioning from investigators. When he learned that Clara and her family were hastily trying to pin all the charges on him and portray him as the mastermind, an extremely vindictive and frenzied anger ignited in his eyes. "Good old Clara. What a bitch who turns on people," Ethan snarled through clenched teeth in the interrogation chair. "She seduced me, used her family capital as bait to induce me to transfer the patents. And now that things have been exposed, she wants to make me the scapegoat? Dream on." In the subsequent questioning, Ethan dropped all pretense and, like emptying a bamboo tube of beans, confessed in full how Clara and her family had been involved in planning the offshore asset transfers and how they used shell companies to launder money, handing over every detail and chat record. He even voluntarily provided multiple key encrypted emails and transfer receipts. This hypocritical alliance, woven from interests and greed, collapsed and fell apart from within in less than 2 days under the ironclad proof of the law and the harsh blows of reality. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun was unusually glaring, yet it could not dispel the deadly chill hanging in the air. In front of the Beijing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court building, dozens of mainstream financial media had already crowded the steps with long lenses and microphones. Flashbulbs popped in waves. Everyone's attention was fixed on the sensational nationwide case about commercial embezzlement and cross-border asset transfers that was about to be sentenced. As the largest victim in the case and now the absolute controlling shareholder of Tiansheng Financial Technology Group, I ascended the steps composedly, flanked by company executives and a team of professional lawyers. I wore a well-tailored dark business suit, my expression cold and calm. Faced with countless flashes and microphones, I did not pause, but walked steadily into the courtroom under the escort of security. Inside the courtroom, the solemn national emblem hung high. In the defendant's dock, Ethan and Clara wore bulky prison uniforms and cold handcuffs, stripped of their former arrogance and swagger. They sat at opposite ends of the dock, unwilling even to meet each other's eyes. After earlier rounds of mutual attacks and finger-pointing, the facts before them were damning: traces of funds flowing through offshore accounts, logs of mass illegal downloads of core patents, and conspiracy emails co-signed by the two. The presiding judge, grave-faced, began to read the judgment spanning dozens of pages. Every charge, every sum of embezzled funds, every misused line of underlying code had been investigated and laid bare. As a senior executive of the company, defendant Ethan abused his position and, together with defendant Clara, concealed matters from the board, forged overseas technology authorizations, and illicitly transferred the company's core assets and massive funds, constituting the crime of occupational embezzlement with especially severe circumstances. They are also suspected of infringing trade secrets. The judge's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. Each word struck the defendants like a hammer blow. When Clara in the front row of the gallery heard the words especially severe circumstances, her body trembled violently, tears instantly welling and spilling over. She gripped the prison garb on her knees with both hands and whispered in despair, "No, it shouldn't be like this. How did I get to this point?" Beside her, Ethan's face went ashen. He stared ahead with hollow eyes. When the court read the final sentence, Ethan to be sentenced to 12 years imprisonment and confiscation of all personal property, Clara to be sentenced to 8 years imprisonment and fined, Ethan finally collapsed completely. He suddenly struggled up from his chair, ignoring the deputy's shouts, and screamed toward where I sat, hoarse, begging for mercy. "Honey, President Shen, I was wrong. For the sake of so many years of marriage, please plead for leniency in court. I'll give up everything. Please spare me this once." I sat in the gallery without even lifting an eyelid. I looked at the man who had once vowed to build a future with me, and my heart was full only of absurdity and coldness. The moment he betrayed our marriage and tried to destroy me and all I had worked for, that person had died in my world. The deputies ruthlessly forced the emotionally unhinged Ethan back into his seat and quickly removed him from the courtroom. Clara was led away like a lump of mud, and the courtroom regained its solemnity. With the criminal verdict settled, the next phase was a comprehensive counteroffensive in civil proceedings and asset recovery. Under the cross-border coordination of Attorney Chen and a top international legal team, the Supreme People's Court and overseas financial law enforcement agencies moved swiftly. All illegal assets under the Cayman Islands Shell Company, the $3 million that had been transferred out, and all core patented code that had been illicitly bundled were all lawfully frozen and forcibly recovered within just 1 month, returning intact to the books of the Tiansheng Group. Moreover, the Clara family's supply chain companies were subjected to court-ordered bankruptcy liquidation for allegedly participating in money laundering and illicit cross-border asset transfers. The capital and family influence they once relied on collapsed instantaneously under the absolute iron fist of the law, like weathered sand sculptures, leaving not a penny behind. During this process, Ethan tried to pass me a property transfer agreement through prison mail in exchange for a sliver of hope for sentence reduction. But every letter was returned to him unopened. I didn't even bother to open them. With my actions I completely severed all his illusions and made him understand that a traitor's fate is total destruction. With all involved assets perfectly restored, the Tiansheng Group not only emerged from this internal catastrophe unscathed, it instead entered an unprecedented growth surge after thoroughly purging the parasites, achieving absolute concentration of equity and a comprehensive upgrade of its technical foundation. At the subsequent general board meeting, the directors unanimously passed a resolution formally electing me as the group's lifelong chairman and CEO. The late autumn wind carried a bite of chill, piercing the double vacuum glass of the high-rise office and circling above the city underfoot. I stood in the boardroom on the top floor of Tiancheng Group, arms folded across my chest. The cut of my black tailored suit emphasized an implacable, sharp line. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's neon glittered like a field of stars, traffic forming flowing rivers of light, surging through the night without cease. The desk phone had long been set to silent. Only the global business reports pulsing on the computer screen emitted a faint blue glow. Ever since the court rendered its final verdict on Ethan and Clara, forced recovery and perfect restitution of all illicit assets, there had been no more noise within the group. Those executives and shareholders who once wavered now faced me with nothing but absolute awe and submission. I turned and walked to the black walnut desk that had once belonged to Ethan and had now been completely rearranged. On the desktop, aside from a few drafts of overseas IPO prospectuses and diagrams of global technology patent layouts, there were no superfluous personal items. The wedding ring that had once sat here had long since been thrown away as trash by me, buried along with that marriage full of betrayal and lies in the past. Chen Lu knocked twice lightly and pushed the door open, holding an urgent document just transmitted from the international stock exchanges. There was an unmistakable excitement in his expression. Mr. Shen, London and New York exchanges just sent final confirmation letters simultaneously. Our restructuring and compliance review of the overseas entities has all passed smoothly. The independent bell-ringing listing process for Tiancheng Group's overseas division is officially launched, scheduled for early next month. I took the document and skimmed it casually. The signature line was steady and strong. I lifted my head, my tone calm and composed. Good work, Chen Lu. Notify PR and strategic development and release the official announcement as planned. Also, increase equity incentives for the Cortec R&D teams. We must ensure we always lead on the global fintech track. Understood, Mr. Shen. Chen Lu nodded, his eyes full of genuine admiration. He hesitated, then asked, by the way. While serving his sentence, Ethan submitted another appeal through his lawyers, requesting a meeting with you to finalize division of some personal assets from back then. No need. I cut him off coldly, not even raising an eyelid. The moment he signed his name to betray the company and tried to destroy me with the lowest means, he became dead to me. The law's judgment is final. Any extra struggles won't change the outcome. Tell him to watch his tongue and reform himself in there. Okay, I understand. Chen Lu said no more, turned and left the office, closing the heavy double wooden doors behind him. The room fell into absolute silence again. I returned to the window, picked up the black coffee on the desk that had long since cooled, and took a small sip. The bitter liquid slid down my throat, bringing an unparalleled clarity and sense of control. I recalled a few months ago, when those anonymously provocative photos and obscene messages were sent to my phone late at night, when that pair thought victory was assured and schemed to crush me beneath their feet. They could never have imagined they had simply stepped onto a one-way road to the abyss that I had personally paved. From covert audits to deep strategic plays, from the one-click all-staff notices to powering down and waiting for the nuclear fallout, every move had been under my absolute control. I didn't shed a single tear, nor did I fall into even a moment of self-doubt, because before absolute strength, a clear mind, and tightly honed legal weapons, all betrayals and conspiracies were nothing more than clowns hastening their own ruin. Now, the smoke of the business battle has cleared and the dust has settled. Ethan paid 12 years of his youth behind cold iron bars for his greed. Clara is bearing the punishment she deserves amid remorse and mutual backbiting. And the capital parasites who sought to devour this company have all been uprooted and turned to ashes. I lowered my gaze to my slender yet powerful fingers, which no longer bear any restraints. No marital shackles, no emotional bonds. This vast business empire, the trust of tens of thousands of employees, and a global leading voice in fintech are now firmly clasped in my palm. From afar the bell tolled midnight. A new day had arrived. facing the deepest night before dawn outside the window. I tilted my chin up slightly. My era is only just beginning. Extra. In the deep winter, a rare clear sky arrived, and the snow outside the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a blinding light under the sun. I sat behind my desk, flipping through the panoramic performance report marking the first anniversary of Tiansheng Group's overseas division going public. Numbers leapt across the financial statements. The doubled revenue and market value proved that last year's thunderstorm had not crushed the company but had instead forged it anew. The line on the internal phone vibrated softly, and the secretary's voice came through. President Shen, the overseas branch has requested a video call, and the supervisory department's closure notice regarding the final recovery of assets has been delivered. Patch it through, I said calmly. The screen lit up. The head of the overseas team was reporting the latest patent layout under their charge. Meanwhile, my gaze was drawn to the thick closure notice on the desk. The end of the document clearly stated, all overseas assets illegally transferred in the case have been forcibly liquidated in full and entirely transferred into Tiansheng Group's special trust account. In that instant, a faint image flashed through my mind. A few months ago, when Ethan and Clara, convinced of victory, tried to destroy me with those obscene photos and words, they could never have imagined that everything they schemed to steal would not only be returned to me intact, but would become the stepping stones to the summit of commerce. At that moment, the office door was gently knocked open and Chen Lu entered, holding legal documents just sent over from the prison. President Shen, this is an update on Ethan's situation during incarceration. Chen paused, his tone tinged with regret. Since Clara's sentence was extended 6 months ago for poor behavior and malicious provocation, Ethan completely fell apart inside. Last week he handed the prison another handwritten letter, asking someone to pass it to me. He says he wants to see you one last time, even if only behind glass to hear you say a word. I didn't look up. My eyes remained on the curves of the financial charts. My voice was cold and devoid of warmth. See him? Chen, do you think someone who's utterly out, who destroyed his own life with his own hands, deserves to take up my time? Destroy the letter without opening it, and from now on intercept anything from there at the highest level. No need to report it to me again. Understood. Chen nodded, a flash of awe in his eyes. He knew very well that the woman before him was no longer the CFO who once endured and yielded in her marriage. She was the absolute ruler of this business empire. Her heart was rock steady. No person or thing could sway her measure anymore. After Chen left, I closed the financial report, stood, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. On the distant street, pedestrians hurried by wrapped in heavy winter coats, and traffic flowed unceasingly. This city was vast and merciless. It had no sympathy for the weak and offered no second chances to the traitorous. And I stood facing the clearest winter sunlight, overlooking the commercial realm I had built and now firmly controlled. The storms of the past had been utterly erased by the river of time. All the clamor, betrayal, schemes, and revenge were now no more than insignificant scenery on the climb to the top. I lifted the warm tea by my side and fixed my gaze on the wider world ahead. My legend had only just begun to turn the most brilliant new page.